This is Dolly Oesterreich, a woman of striking beauty who was so cunning and audacious that she hid her lover in the very house she shared with her husband for 10 years. They carried on their clandestine affair, risking exposure hundreds of times. But none of that mattered to Dolly as long as her desires were fulfilled. A daring housewife hid her lover in the attic for 10 years. In 1880, in a turbulent Germany, Dolly was born into a middle-class family. However, only a few years later, she and her parents had to immigrate to America to survive, living in poverty and hardship on farms in the Midwest. In 1892, when Dolly was 12 years old, life gradually became less harsh for her when she was hired to work at a textile factory in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The factory was owned by an immigrant of German origin, just like Dolly. Working diligently day by day, Dolly was well liked by everyone, especially by the factory owner, Fred Oesterreich, who quickly became infatuated with her. In 1897, at the age of 17, Dolly's life took a new turn when she left her job to become Fred's wife, the owner of one of the largest textile factories in Milwaukee. Dolly, with a heart longing for happiness, expected to be loved and live a fulfilled life with her wealthy husband. However, contrary to her expectations, married life proved different. While Dolly stayed home, doing housework, taking care of the family, and sewing during her free time, Fred was always busy with work, enjoying gatherings with friends, drinking excessively, and often returning home in a foul mood. The young woman was never satisfied with her daily life or her bedroom affairs. Their heated arguments, sometimes involving violence, created a growing distance between them. With no children and a marriage cracking day by day, both Fred and Dolly could not have foreseen that their fateful days together were just beginning after more than a decade of marriage. On a warm autumn day in 1913, Dolly, then in her 30s, noticed her sewing machine had broken. She called her husband to vent her frustration, but instead of coming home to fix it, Fred sent a young employee to do the job. The young man, Otto Sandhuber, then 17 years old, was the one tasked with the repair. It seemed Dolly had anticipated her husband's move and guessed that he would send someone else. When Otto arrived, he was greeted by Dolly in a revealing outfit, wearing only a robe and stockings. Unable to resist the allure of the woman in her 30s, Otto quickly fell into her arms. Dolly and Otto continued their affair, keeping it secret in the usual way, meeting at hotels or Otto's place whenever they wanted to be intimate. Eventually, they even began to use Dolly's marital bed when Fred was away at work. However, after some time, meeting outside became tedious, and they decided to use Dolly's bed for their trysts. Unsurprisingly, Dolly's neighbors started noticing Otto's frequent presence and began to suspect. When questioned, Dolly claimed that Otto was her half-brother who had been lost for years. Still, the neighbors were skeptical and often reported their suspicions to Fred, forcing him to confront Dolly. She lied, saying Otto was a pesky book salesman who regularly came to the house to bother her. Fred, surprisingly, seemed to accept this explanation. As the scrutiny increased, Dolly devised a plan for Otto to live in the attic of their home, allowing them to be together without arousing suspicion. Otto, deeply infatuated, agreed immediately. He quit his job at the factory and moved into the attic, which he turned into a simple living space with a mattress, a toilet, a lamp, and some books to read and write. He aspired to be a writer, and this helped pass the time. In return for being near Dolly, Otto dubbed himself her sex slave. But Otto's duties extended beyond the bedroom. He cooked, cleaned, washed dishes, made the bed, and performed various repairs around the house. Surprisingly, Otto was content with this arrangement. Fred, despite his business acumen, never seemed to suspect anything unusual. Over the next 5 years, although he occasionally sensed another presence in the house, he never investigated further. It wasn't until Fred announced in 1918 that he would open another factory on the West Coast and persuaded Dolly to move to Los Angeles, California, that things began to change. Using her cunning, Dolly insisted their new home must have an attic like their old one. Complying with her wishes, Fred found a house with an attic overlooking Sunset Boulevard. Dolly arranged for Otto to move there first, ensuring their covert life continued seamlessly in Los Angeles. At night, Otto tried to keep as quiet as possible to avoid arousing Fred's suspicion. Occasionally, Fred would hear strange noises coming from the attic and even noticed a few cigars missing, but he never imagined that his wife's lover was living up there. Over the next 10 years, Fred remained an alcoholic, and they frequently argued. When drunk, Fred would severely beat his wife, while Otto continued to be passionately in love with Dolly. This illicit affair continued until Otto himself put an end to everything. On August 22, 1922, while Otto was in the attic, he overheard Dolly and Fred arguing. As the noise grew louder and Dolly's screams intensified, Otto thought Fred was beating Dolly, even though she had just slipped on a rug. Losing his composure, Otto rushed down to the room where the Oesterreichs were fighting, brandishing 2 pistols. Fred recognized Otto as his former employee and, realizing the situation, became extremely angry. During the struggle, the gun went off and Fred was shot. In a panic, Otto locked Dolly in a closet, leaving the key outside the door before fleeing back to the attic with the guns. Otto knew that the neighbors would call the police about the gunshots, and this way, Dolly would have an alibi. She couldn't have shot her husband while being locked in the closet. When the police arrived, Dolly fabricated a story about a robbery, claiming that the intruder shot Fred and then locked her in the closet before fleeing with some valuable items. The detectives found Dolly's account suspicious, particularly since Fred was killed with a .25 caliber pistol, a weapon not commonly used by burglars. However, the police couldn't explain how Dolly could have killed Fred and locked herself in the closet, so they had to release her. They never suspected Otto's presence in the house. Afterward, the murder was considered a robbery gone wrong based on Dolly's testimony that the thief managed to steal a watch before escaping. As a result, Dolly not only evaded suspicion but also inherited all of Fred's wealth. She bought a new house in the area, which, of course, had an attic even larger than the previous one for Otto to move into. However, when Dolly moved to the new place, Otto stayed behind in the attic in Los Angeles. Otto managed to get a few of his writings published, and with the money he earned, plus a few coins from Dolly, he bought a typewriter to continue his writing career. Dolly moved alone and carefully hired a lawyer named Herman Shapiro to manage her finances. Unexpectedly, Dolly fell in love with Herman and even gave him Fred's diamond-studded watch. When Herman realized the watch belonged to Fred, Dolly lied, claiming she found it under a seat cushion and didn't think it necessary to report to the police. Herman quickly forgot this oddity and was swept away by his love for Dolly. Unfortunately, Herman, like Fred, became absorbed in his work, neglecting Dolly. But this was of little consequence to Dolly, who simply found another lover. This time, it was Roy Klum, whom she asked to dispose of one of the guns used by Fred and Otto. The other gun she asked a neighbor to get rid of. Now, with Roy satisfying Dolly's desires, the affair continued until eventually, both Herman and Roy turned on Dolly, bringing the guns to the police and implicating her in Fred's murder. Dolly was promptly arrested and underwent lengthy interrogations. The police did everything they could to determine why Dolly killed her husband and how she did it, but they couldn't figure out how she could have locked herself in the closet. Consequently, no charges were brought against her, and the investigation dragged on. Meanwhile, Otto was still living in the attic. Dolly, worried that no one would care for her lover, told Herman about a cousin living in the attic and asked him to bring food to Otto. When Herman met Otto, who had not spoken to anyone other than Dolly for 10 years, Otto eagerly recounted the whole story of his relationship with Dolly. Herman, in turn, updated Otto on the current situation. Not wanting to be accused of murder, Otto fled to Canada after the story was published in the press. He changed his name to Walter Klein and married a woman there. Meanwhile, a neighbor of Dolly's found the remaining gun and brought it to the police, but both guns had corroded, rendering them useless as evidence. Moreover, Dolly was reported to be gravely ill and close to death, so she was released, and all charges against her were dropped. Dolly was set free, and ironically, Herman continued to live with her until he finally saw the light and betrayed Dolly. After living together for 7 years, they separated, and Herman told the police what he knew about Fred's murder. Dolly and Otto were immediately arrested and charged with murder and conspiracy. At the trial, Otto confessed everything, explaining that he acted out of intense love for Dolly and believed that he needed to protect her from Fred on that fateful night. Dolly maintained that she loved her husband despite hiding Otto in the attic for 10 years. However, the prosecutor depicted her as a cold-blooded killer who had abetted her attic lover in the murder. The prosecutor argued that any sympathy should be reserved for Fred, who, moments before his death, discovered his wife's infidelity in their own attic. The jury found Otto guilty of manslaughter, and the case was dubbed the Batman case because Otto had been hidden in an attic much like a bat in a dark cave. However, the statute of limitations for the murder had expired, so Otto received no punishment and was released. There was insufficient evidence to convict Dolly, who was also released. Many might speculate that Dolly, out of shame, would move far away to start anew or live a lonely life until her death. But no, Dolly continued her life, entering a relationship with a man named Ray Hedrick, with whom she lived for over 30 years. They married on April 5, 1961, and just 3 days later, Dolly passed away at the age of 80. To this day, when people hear the name Dolly, they find it hard to believe how she managed to persuade a man like Otto to live in a cramped attic for 10 years. Was it love, or did Dolly possess an extraordinary allure that kept him bound to her? Perhaps only Otto could answer that question, and it's unlikely to encounter another lover-in-the-dark story with a nest built in such a peculiar place.